We've all seen it. That grainy black and white figure coming down a ladder. A boot planting itself in gray dust. And we've all heard the words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." For more than half a century, the story of Apollo 11 has been a cornerstone of human history, a monument to our ambition and our guts. It's the official story. But what if it isn't the whole story? For decades, a different story has been spreading, first in whispers and photocopies, and now through a flood of digital conspiracies. This version talks about dark secrets, of a lie so massive it had to be hidden. It points to things in the photos that just seem off. A flag waving where there's no air. A black sky with no stars. Shadows falling at impossible angles. These are the supposed clues that lead to one staggering conclusion. The moon landing was the biggest lie ever told. These are the so-called dark secrets of Apollo 11. But what if the real secret isn't that we faked it? What if the truth, the real science behind what we're seeing, is even more complex, more awe-inspiring, and more fascinating than any conspiracy? We're going to peel back the layers of myth and misinformation, look at the evidence, and find out what really happened on the moon. The answers aren't what you think, and they're way more interesting than any lie. One small step for man, one giant leap for conspiracy theories. For decades, we've been told these images are proof of a lie. A flag waving in a vacuum? No stars in the sky? These are the dark secrets of Apollo 11. But what if the truth isn't that they were faked, but that the real science behind what you're seeing is even more mind-blowing than the conspiracy itself? We're about to find out what really happened up there. Let's start with the most iconic piece of evidence for the hoax, the American flag. We see Buzz Aldrin saluting it, a symbol of triumph on another world. But as he moves, the flag ripples, it flutters. And the question that has echoed for 50 years is simple: how can a flag wave where there's no wind? The moon is, for all intents and purposes, a vacuum. No atmosphere, no air, no breeze. So when we see that ripple, our Earth-based intuition tells us something's wrong. On Earth, a flag only moves when air moves it. The conspiracy conclusion is simple. If the flag is waving, there must be air. If there's air, it's not the moon. It must be a soundstage, with a draft from a door or a hidden fan. This is where the real story gets way more interesting than the fiction. First off, NASA's engineers weren't idiots. They knew a normal flag would just hang there, limp and lifeless, a pretty underwhelming symbol for mankind's greatest achievement. So, their solution was clever. They designed a special flag assembly. It didn't just have a vertical pole, it had a telescoping horizontal bar that ran along the top. The idea was to extend it fully and stretch the flag out, like a banner. But the moon isn't a great place for simple tasks. During the Apollo 11 mission, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin actually struggled to get the horizontal bar to extend all the way. It got stuck. Because they couldn't lock it into place, the flag wasn't pulled perfectly taut. It was left with a bunch of wrinkles and folds from being packed tightly for the trip. So, in still photos, those wrinkles give the illusion of motion. It looks like it's fluttering, but it's just crumpled. But what about the video, where the flag clearly does move? This is the core of the claim, and the answer is a beautiful lesson in basic physics, Newton's first law of motion. An object in motion stays in motion unless an outside force acts on it. On Earth, that outside force is air resistance. If you shake a flag here, air molecules create friction and stop the motion almost immediately. But in a vacuum, Armstrong and Aldrin had to twist and shove the flagpole to get it into the dense lunar soil. Every twist and push transferred energy, momentum, into the flag. That energy made it swing back and forth. On the moon, there is almost no air resistance to stop it. The only thing slowing it down is the tiny amount of friction within the nylon fibers of the flag itself. So, once it started moving, it kept swinging for a surprisingly long time, long after the astronauts let go. In a fantastic twist, the very thing that doubters point to as proof of a fake is actually proof that it was real. On a windy film set, the flag would have waved randomly. On a still film set, it would have stopped moving quickly because of air resistance. Only in the near-perfect vacuum of the moon would it behave exactly as we see it. Ironically, Buzz Aldrin himself said he thought the flag was knocked over by the engine exhaust when they lifted off. For years, everyone assumed the Apollo 11 flag was down, but recent high-resolution images from NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter show that at least 5 of the 6 Apollo flags are still standing. The waving flag isn't a secret, it's a science lesson. The next dark secret is an astronomical one. Look at any photo from the lunar surface. You see the brilliant white spacesuits, the gray ground, the pitch-black sky, and that's it. Not a single star. Conspiracy theorists say this is a dead giveaway. With no atmosphere, the stars should be blazing brighter than we could ever imagine from Earth. Their absence, they claim, proves the photos were taken in a studio, and NASA just left the stars out because they couldn't fake their positions correctly from a lunar perspective. Again, it's a good question, but the answer isn't in astronomy. It's in photography 101. The reason there are no stars in the Apollo photos is the same reason you can't see stars from a brightly lit street at night. The foreground is just too bright. You have to remember, while the sky was black, the astronauts were working in direct, unfiltered sunlight. The landings were all timed for the lunar morning, with the sun low on the horizon, to create long shadows that would help them judge craters and rocks. The lunar surface is highly reflective, and so are the bright white spacesuits. The whole scene was incredibly bright. Now, think about how a camera works. To take a picture of something bright, you have to use a very fast shutter speed and a small aperture to avoid overexposing the shot. The Hasselblad cameras the astronauts used were set for daylight. Their shutter speeds were just a fraction of a second. Stars, however, are incredibly faint points of light. To photograph them, you need to do the exact opposite. Use a long exposure, keeping the shutter open for several seconds, and a wide aperture to gather as much light as possible. You can't do both in a single shot. It's a choice. You can either expose for the brightly lit astronaut, in which case the faint stars won't show up, or you can expose for the stars, in which case the astronaut and the landscape would be a featureless white mess. NASA went to the moon to document their work on the surface, not to take pretty pictures of constellations. Interestingly, when asked later, the astronauts said they didn't remember seeing any stars with their own eyes either. Just like when you step out of a dark room into bright sunshine, their eyes were adapted to the intense glare of the landscape around them. Their pupils were constricted and they were focused on their mission. The irony is that the empty sky is a mark of authenticity. A Hollywood production in the 1960s trying to fake a space scene would have almost certainly painted stars on the backdrop because that's what we expect space to look like. The fact that the photos obey the real-world limits of photography is one of the strongest, most subtle clues that they're genuine. Alright, let's tackle the next big one, the shadows. In a few famous photos, shadows cast by the astronauts and the lander don't look parallel. They seem to go off at odd angles. The conspiracy argument is that on the moon, with the sun as a single, distant light source, all shadows should be parallel. These non-parallel shadows, they claim, are proof of multiple lights, like big studio spotlights placed close by. This feels logical. Light from the sun, 93 million miles away, does arrive in essentially parallel rays. But the explanation isn't multiple lights. It's a combination of perspective and terrain. First, perspective. Think about looking down a long, straight set of train tracks. You know the tracks are parallel, but they appear to converge to a single point in the distance. That's perspective. The same thing happens with shadows in a two-dimensional photograph. When you have shadows of different lengths, cast by objects at different distances, they won't look parallel in the final image. They'll appear to point in different directions. Second, and just as important, is the ground itself. The conspiracy theory relies on the false assumption that the lunar surface is perfectly flat. It's anything but. The moon is a rugged landscape of craters, hills, and rolling terrain. A shadow cast across a slope or into a small dip will be distorted. It might look shorter, longer, or bent compared to a shadow on flat ground right next to it. When you combine the natural effect of perspective with the uneven ground, the weird shadows are exactly what you'd expect. And here's the fatal flaw in the multiple lights theory. If there were multiple lights, every single object would cast multiple shadows. Go to a stadium at night with its giant light towers. Every player has several shadows. But in every single one of the thousands of Apollo photographs, no object, not an astronaut, not a rock, not the lander, ever has more than one shadow. The truly mind-blowing part is about the light you can see in the shadows. Details on the side of the lunar module that are in shadow are still visible. Why? The conspiracy says it's fill light from a studio. The real answer is much cooler. The light source is the moon itself. The bright, dusty ground acts as a giant natural reflector, bouncing sunlight into the shadowed areas. The studio was the entire lunar surface. Let's move on to two more claims: the lack of a blast crater under the lunar module and the supposedly impassable Van Allen radiation belts. First, the landing. The lunar module, or LM, used a rocket engine to descend. Theorists argue that this engine should have blasted a huge crater in the soft lunar dust. But in the photos, the LM is just sitting there, with its footpads on a relatively undisturbed surface. This, they claim, proves it was just lowered by a crane onto a set. This idea comes from a misunderstanding of how rockets work in a vacuum. On Earth, a rocket exhaust plume interacts violently with the atmosphere, kicking up lots of debris. But in the vacuum of space, the exhaust expands much more cleanly. More importantly, the moon's gravity is only 1/6 of Earth's. In the final moments of descent, the engine was throttled way down to about 3,000 pounds of thrust, just enough to slow the lander for a gentle touchdown, not blast a hole in the ground. While it did blow the loose surface dust away, which you can see in the photos, it didn't have the power to carve a crater into the compacted soil underneath. When Armstrong finally set the Eagle down, he had about 45 to 60 seconds of fuel left. Not much, but enough for a safe landing. Now for the invisible killer, the Van Allen radiation belts. These are two zones of intense radiation surrounding Earth. The claim is that the radiation is so lethal that no astronaut could have passed through and survived. NASA was, of course, fully aware of the belts. The Apollo missions were meticulously planned to deal with them. First, speed. The spacecraft blasted through the belts at high velocity, so the total exposure time was short. Second, the trajectory. The missions were plotted to fly through the thinnest parts of the belts, avoiding the most intense areas. Think of it like skimming the edge of a donut hole instead of punching through the middle. Third, the spacecraft itself was a shield. The aluminum hull of the command and service modules blocked the vast majority of the particles. The astronauts' radiation doses were monitored and were well within safe limits, less than what a patient might receive from a full-body CT scan today. The safe passage through the Van Allen belts isn't a dark secret. It's a testament to one of the most brilliant feats of engineering in human history. So, we've busted the myths. Now let's look at the mountain of proof that says we did go. First, the rocks. Over 6 landings, astronauts brought back 842 pounds of lunar samples. These aren't just souvenirs. They've been studied by thousands of scientists worldwide. Their chemistry is unique. They have no water, which is impossible for Earth rocks. They show signs of being formed in a vacuum and are covered in tiny micrometeorite craters from billions of years of exposure. Their ages, some over 4.5 billion years old, have helped us understand how the moon, and even the Earth, was formed. Second, there's an experiment that's still running today. The Apollo 11, 14, and 15 crews left special mirrors on the surface called retroreflectors. For over 50 years, observatories on Earth have been firing lasers at these mirrors and timing the return signal, a round trip of about 2.5 seconds, to measure the distance to the moon with incredible precision. This ongoing experiment has provided a wealth of data about our solar system. You can't bounce a laser off a film set. Third, we have independent photos. In 2009, NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter flew over the landing sites and took high-resolution pictures. The images are undeniable. They clearly show the descent stages of the lunar modules right where they were left. You can even see the faint tracks left by the astronauts' boots and the lunar rover wheels, preserved for decades in the airless environment. The landing sites are there. They are real. Finally, there's the logic of the conspiracy itself. The Apollo program involved over 400,000 people. To believe it was a hoax, you have to believe every single one of them has kept the secret for over 50 years. No deathbed confessions, no credible whistleblowers. And what about the competition? The Soviet Union was in a bitter Cold War space race with America. They were monitoring everything. Exposing a fake would have been the greatest propaganda victory in history. What did they do? They sent their official congratulations. The greatest rival of the United States confirmed their success. This journey through the science of Apollo 11 reveals a story far richer than any conspiracy. It's a story of human ingenuity conquering incredible odds. If you love digging into the real science behind big stories like this, consider subscribing and liking this video. It helps us continue to separate fact from fiction. Let me know in the comments what other topics you'd like to see investigated. After all this, one fair question remains. If we really went, why haven't we been back? The half-century gap feels suspicious. The answer isn't about technology, it's about politics and money. The Apollo program was a product of the Cold War, a race to prove American superiority over the Soviet Union. Once Apollo 11 crossed that finish line, the immense cost, over $150 billion in today's money, became impossible to justify. National priorities shifted. We stopped going not because we couldn't, but because the political will had evaporated. Now, that's changing with the Artemis program, which aims to return humans to the moon for good. In the end, the dark secrets of Apollo 11 are not about deception. They are secrets of physics, engineering, and perspective. The truth of what happened on the moon is not a lie to be hidden, but an achievement to be celebrated. It's a profoundly human story about facing the unknown, solving impossible problems, and daring to venture into the void armed with courage and math. Believing the conspiracy means trading a story of incredible human achievement for one of petty deception. It dismisses the dedication of 400,000 people and the bravery of the astronauts who rode a controlled explosion 250,000 miles from home. The real story, the one written in the laws of physics and etched in the lunar dust, is infinitely more inspiring. It reminds us what we're capable of when we are at our most curious and our most courageous, and that is a secret worth sharing.